your stuff away and check out for the day. There's no time to waste when it's 100 degrees. Burns under my feet. Won't you have a drink with me? We head into town, see what it's about. Barely need a shirt though the sun has almost set. Make the most of it. I know we will dance and sing. There's a heat wave. There's a
Hey,
heat
folks.
wave rolling in. There's a heat wave.
All right. Welcome. It's ECM. I'm going to slide myself over a little bit so I'm like actually in front of my camera. Hey, good morning. Welcome. It's Resistance Live. It's ECM. You guys know that. Also known as Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. Welcome to our new viewers. We have some more brand new subscribers over on Patreon. We got a lot to cover today, particularly about ongoing developments in the speaker's race, but also some surprising developments in the New York State fraud case. So before we do that, I am, as always, coming to you from occupied Tongva land here in Southern California. Today, my hair is down. I have dirty blonde hair, pink skin, green eyes. I am wearing my black ribbed sweater for our friends who are visually disabled. I'm actually going to turn down my light here because I feel like it's just too bright. Okay. Now I'm too gold. All right, let's fix this. Those of you who specialize in lighting and video and film production are going to laugh at me for doing that live on the air, but that's how it is. All right. I'm super tired today, by the way, you guys. The dogs kept me up all night. It's like chaos. All right. Also, my pronouns are she, her, and I am really excited that all of you are here today. We have so much to cover. We've got like people from all over the place, as always. Hey, Kennebunkport, San Ramon, California, Portland, Oregon, Brentwood, Wisconsin, Pittsburgh. Hello, Joe. Alaska. Tammy, it's nice to see you. We've got Windham, Maine, St. Paul, Minnesota. Okay, so here we are. I'm glad you guys laughed at my thumbnail, by the way, because I was literally like, how many times are we going to do this thing of running somebody for Speaker of the House? All right. Let's start there. So we had a bunch of questions on the feed this morning about all these candidates who have now put their name forward now that Jim Jordan is out. And I need to just be really honest with all of you guys that there is none of these candidates are good. All right. And I know that some of you still watch Morning Joe. Don't ask me why, because we all know where that show comes down on this stuff. But, you know, like Kay Granger threw her hat in the ring this morning, apparently. Morning Joe went off on this. Those of you who don't remember this might need a little refresher that Kay Granger was one of the representatives who spent the 4th of July in Russia in 2018, meeting with like Putin and his people. All right. I mean, I got to tell you, like, there's nobody in this race who looks good. Now, there's a chart circulating this morning that was pulled together, I think, by PolitiFact that does indicate that, you know, Tom Emmer voted to confirm the election results on January 6th, and he voted in favor of gay marriage, and he's voted to support Ukraine. Well, I got bad news for you on Emmer as well, okay? Because Emmer also signed on to an amicus brief before the Supreme Court, as did literally every other person in the speaker's race seeking to overturn the results of the 2020 election. So even though he's the only one among them who voted in the right way on January 6th, he still signed on to a brief in front of the Supreme Court that claimed that the election should be overturned. So there's, you know, no issue here. Oh, the banner. Thank you for reminding me, Tammy. There's no issue here that any of these folks are reasonable. And we all just kind of have to really get clear on the fact that there's not going to be a situation where anybody inside the GOP who is arguably capable of bringing the factions inside the House GOP together is not problematic. All right. I feel like I've gotten a number of questions, by the way, both for Coffee Hour yesterday. By the way, if you didn't watch it and you're a Patreon subscriber, you can go back and watch it. If you're not a Patreon subscriber, and you head on over and become a paid subscriber now, you can actually watch yesterday's Progressive Coffee Hour because I talked about this in more detail. But, you know, one of the things that people kind of need to just grasp here is that it's all chaos all the time right now. And I'm not expecting that it's going to get any better anytime soon. Now, there have been a number of people who have been suggesting that there should be something like a moderate Republican compromise. All right. And again, I have to remind you all, there is no such thing in this GOP as a moderate Republican. Okay. And I really want people to kind of like sink into that fact. Okay. There's not going to be a good solution here. And, you know, when people asked me, you know, on the feed this morning, you know, and yesterday, actually, before Progressive Coffee Hour, like, who do I think is the best candidate out of this bunch? I got to tell you, I don't think any of them are worthy of the role. There's not anybody who is running who has their hands clean in the context of the insurrection. And so I just don't, I don't really understand, one, why it is that it's like looking for the mythical swing voter these days, right? I don't know why anybody would be looking for the mythical moderate in today's GOP. Like, there isn't one, all right? Now, there are calls this morning for the House GOP, for the House in general, to stay in DC until a new speaker is appointed. I don't know how long that's going to take. There's also a planned candidates forum tomorrow. All right. So we're going to be talking a lot more about the race for the Speaker of the House this week. And I don't know. Other people have said to me, by the way, isn't chaos the point? And I think Dash asked this question this morning on the Patreon feed as well. I have mixed feelings about that. What I said on Friday and what I'll say here again is that there is certainly, the Bannonites in the party are all chaos all the time. All right. Do I think the whole GOP wants chaos? No. And I'll tell you why. Because it's very clear to people like Kevin McCarthy and many, many others who gave interviews after the Jim Jordan fiasco last week that right now they look like people who can't govern. And that does not bode well at all for 2024, right? Some of them are still rational enough to understand that chaos actually means the end of the GOP. And I think quite a number of them at this point are quite aware of the blowback that is ongoing about this fiasco. I got to remind you guys, some of these people are not like super rich, right? You know, you're a member of Congress. I think the base salary now is 170 grand a year. A lot of people run for office without having any kind of like nest egg whatsoever. And these people are going to be out of a job. So I just, I don't really think we're in a situation right now where anybody, by the way, should be compromising on anything on our side of the fence. But I also don't want anybody here to think that we're going to be in a situation where there's going to be some mythical magic solution to this that isn't going to be damaging to the country. All right. So, I have to point out, Rebecca, I see your comment here about you hate to see the Dems bailing out the Republicans. Nobody's bailing anybody out yet. And, I also just have to point out that I think we're in a situation right now because Emmer doesn't even have the votes. By the way, I just want to point this out. Emmer doesn't even have the votes, and he's supposed to be the leading candidate in this round. All right. Nobody has the votes to make it right now. So in order for them to get any Democratic votes, there's going to have to be like really serious concessions made. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Hakeem Jeffries is going to extract a huge price if there is an expectation that some Democrats might join to make him speaker, or anyone else for that matter. All right. So, I got to say again what I said many, many, many times last week, which is when your enemy is destroying themselves, just leave them alone, right? Like, that's the best strategy here. Okay, we have some very interesting developments this morning in the New York State fraud trial. First of all, the trial was supposed to be continuing today, and it's not. Apparently, there was some form of a COVID exposure. We do not know what that means, if it's like the judge or the clerks or anybody else, but they're not having trial today. The trial has been postponed until tomorrow. One of the things that is on deck, though, which is really fascinating, is that Ivanka Trump has been subpoenaed to testify. Now, many of you know, we talked about this when the trial was starting, that Ivanka Trump was dismissed as a defendant in the case due to statute of limitations concerns. She stepped away from the Trump Organization at the time that her dad was elected, and therefore did not have any oversight over the allegations within the window that's required here, did not have any oversight over the allegations that would have allowed the statute of limitations to be tolled in the way that it was on some of these other claims. We've talked a lot about tolling here. What it means is that if there's a continuous pattern of conduct in which all of the defendants have engaged, the statute of limitations essentially restarts with every fraudulent act. And Ivanka's conduct basically like cut her off when she quit doing that work for the Trump organization, such that charges could not be sustained against her now. But she has a lot of evidence. And that evidence is something that she has been called to give in this trial. It puts her in a very difficult situation because fundamentally she's going to have to choose between perjury and implicating her father in the fraud scheme. There's kind of like no other way around this. Now, for those who don't understand why it's so specifically a challenge, and she, by the way, is contesting the subpoena because of this. The papers don't say that, but that's the reason why she's doing it. She was offered as a perk in her employment for the Trump organization, the ability to purchase the apartment that she was renting from the company for $8.5 million. Meanwhile, I mean, it's just, you got to love the details of this. That apartment that she was renting was represented on the financial statements at certain points to be worth more than $20 million. Okay. So again, I got to remind you, this is also part of the way in which, like, you know, Weisselberg was corrupted. It had to do with the fact that apartments were being provided to him and his family members. And, you know, the way in which those apartments were being valued, et cetera, was like really off base. And also it was kind of like a way of keeping him in the fold. So one of the things that we're going to have to see here is how this plays out with regard to Ivanka Trump. Now, I have to say to everybody here, because I know this is going to come up, and, you know, those of you who are long timers, just forgive me the moment of repeat. I knew Ivanka Trump and I did some work with Ivanka Trump back when she was a Democrat in New York. Like, she and Jared used to host fundraisers for Hillary Clinton in their apartment in the years before he decided to run and before the dreaded escalator moment. Okay. So if anybody Googles me and you see my name affiliated with Ivanka Trump, that's the deal. And as soon as it turned out to be the case that he was running and that she was involved in it, I severed all ties. So I don't want anybody coming on here and being like, wait a minute, but you worked with Ivanka. I only worked with Ivanka until it turned out that she had gone fascist. All right. And yes, there were problems with her dad long before that. But you all will remember there was a window of time in like the early 2010s where she was kind of perceived to be outside the fold of the company and the organization. That was kind of like the way in which her branding was designed. And then she went all the way back in. All right. So I always have to give that caveat. There's whole stories about this. I gave interviews to the New York Times. I gave interviews to the New Yorker about the way in which this whole saga went down when I was like, I'm out. And all the things that she said and all the things that I said and all the documented emails. So, you know, in any event, I want to make it really clear for our new viewers in case you see it. You know, like, there is a long story behind that also involves like my separation from my work with her at the moment where it became very clear what was happening. And I didn't know he was going to run for office before he announced. So in any event, all right. We have additional issues, however, in the New York State trial right now with regard to testimony that is upcoming. All right. So Michael Cohen is scheduled to testify tomorrow. All right. And we don't know what that testimony is going to look like. Now, I'm going to remind you all, we may have a little bit of a preview here on the basis of everything that he said when he testified in front of Congress. And again, I think that some of that is going to be repetitive because it's going to be about what he was asked to do. It's going to be about how the financial statements were constructed. It's going to be about the fact that everybody in the organization who was at the highest levels, including all of the named defendants, knew exactly what was going on. He is the ultimate insider. And, you know, the testimony is going to be really damning. He's been considered to be sort of like the star witness of this case. It's going to be really interesting to watch what happens there. Meanwhile, however, Trump overnight, late last night, attacked again Judge Engoron on Truth Social. I'm going to remind everybody, we had a situation last week where Engoron almost threw Trump in jail for leaving up a post about his law clerk on his website for fundraising purposes, which was claimed to be an accident. A fine was issued, but the final warning was dropped. And it was basically like, I don't care if it's intentional or it's not intentional. You violate the gag order again, you're going to jail. There is a slight caveat to this, which is the judge himself in the gag order that's been issued in New York State. The judge himself is not actually a named protected party. There is a broad category of like courtroom staff, all right, into which this could fall. We will have to see how this goes, all right? You know, but I will tell you that, you know, my eyebrows were definitely raised this morning when I was like reading through the latest breaking news at 5 a.m. about the fact that after all of this, including the threat to imprison him if he violated the gag order again, late last night, in a clear fit of panic and extinction bursting, he went after the judge. And again, we got to see. We got to see what happens next. I don't think he's really, I mean, he is not that smart, Rose, but I'm just going to point out one other thing here, all right? He's a malignant narcissist. He can't keep his mouth shut, and he is currently cornered. And we have spent so much time as well here talking about what happens when the chips finally start to fall around the conduct of a malignant narcissist, whether it's criminal or otherwise being discovered as not being what they have represented themselves to be. And I've said over and over and over again here on the broadcast over the last few years, really all the way back to 2016, that at the moment when he is finally facing liability, we could expect his conduct to get ever more extreme. So I do not actually think that we're in a situation here where we can expect him to keep his mouth shut. It's really like a matter of not if, but when. And Goran has walked closer than any other judge involved in these multiple prosecutions to threatening pretrial detention. And, you know, I got to say, it may be pretrial detention for like 48 hours. That may be enough to give Trump a taste of what it's like to be in jail. Like, we'll have to see how this plays out. I, again, want to say to everybody, because, you know, I know we have some viewers here who are just like really pissed off that he hasn't already been detained. I have to remind everyone that what we are trying to avoid here is the overturning of rulings by the judge at trial. All right. Anything that would arguably jeopardize the conviction at trial. All right. So there is a reason to be very, very, very cautious here in the lead up to actually detaining him. And yes, we can have whole discussions about the fact that any one of us, if we were walking around and doing the same thing, would already be in jail. But I have to point out, okay, like, our criminal justice system isn't fair that way. And so nobody should be surprised by that. But also, there are very good reasons for every judge involved in this to be extremely cautious about the rulings that they issue in any way that could arguably overturn a criminal conviction. They want it to stick. All right. And if the end result is he does, you know, 48 hours of jail time now in pretrial detention, or he gets another bite at the apple where he's fined, you know, like $50,000 instead of $5,000. I don't want anybody to lose their minds about this, because what we really want in the long run is for him to be imprisoned for the rest of his life, right? We can all be a little bit more patient. Like, you know, so I just really want people to be like really, really, really clear about this. All right. And yes, this behavior is very typical. I unfortunately have also lived with one, Pam. So I know what this is like, right? When you're cornered, when a narcissist is cornered, they get more violent, they get more outrageous, and it's like they're drowning. All right. And so we're going to have to expect that his behavior all along and leading up to like whatever the end result is here is going to get ever more outrageous. And that is all the more reason for no one to lose their minds over it. Right. Like, we all know what this is. We don't have to be like jacked up to level 11. I feel like I say this every broadcast now, simply because he's acting out. All right. This is all very, 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 very predictable. Okay. If you have not yet liked this broadcast, we have 611 people watching live. Please hit the like button on this broadcast. And if you are not yet a subscriber, hit subscribe. I'm here 5 days a week. You want to make sure you know what we're doing, because we're talking about all this stuff like literally every day and sometimes multiple times a day. Okay. So that's New York, and we're going to have to see what happens. It's going to be a really interesting week in the New York trial. Now that, you know, Ken Chesebro has pled guilty, we have yet again a little bit of a period here where things are slow in Fulton County. Now, I got to remind everybody, for all the other defendants, other than the two who have now pled, who were supposed to go to trial today, we still have a schedule for motions practice that is supposed to end around December 1st. The big question that's looming now, which we may hear about this week, is whether or not Judge McAfee in Fulton County is going to speed up that schedule. Because it's possible that now that trial is off and Fani Willis has represented that she was ready to try everybody starting today, that we may get a quicker trial date. I don't know. We're going to have to see how that goes. All right. I really want folks to understand, though, that, you know, we still have the looming JACKSMITH trial scheduled to start March 4th. We have E. Jean Carroll's second civil trial scheduled to start the first week in January. And we've got other looming legal issues, including the New York State trial, that are like leading all the way up to like, you know, and beyond the first primaries and Super Tuesday. All right. So it would be my hope that he would, you know, McAfee would move this trial up, because there's no reason for any delay any longer. But we'll see. We'll see what he does. And yes, of course, Trump did deny that Sidney Powell wasn't his lawyer, even though there's a tweet saying, welcome Sidney Powell to the legal team at the time. It's all like super, super, super predictable. Okay. We got to talk about North Carolina today. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about the administrative stay in Chutkan's case, which I did discuss for our Patreon subscribers yesterday morning on Progressive Coffee Hour. So forgive me for doing a little bit of a reboot here, but I want the rest of our viewers who aren't yet on Patreon, even though you should be, to know what's going on there. So Friday night, Trump's team challenged the gag order in the district court for the District of Columbia. And they did it on absolutely ridiculous grounds. Like, there's not a single lawyer I know, and I was one of the first to point this out, and all the other legal commentators have done the same, who thinks that this is a remotely reasonable motion. He's asking for a stay pending the appeal of the gag order on the basis, among others, that he's claiming that his base has a First Amendment right to hear him talk. Okay, there is no such thing, all right? There are a series of cases that say things like, when you put a gag order on a candidate, the populace will, lacks the benefit of hearing from the candidate when they're running for office. But that does not translate to a First Amendment right to hear Donald Trump speak, all right? And all of this is very, very, very over the line. There's nothing in this brief that is at all reasonable, but Chutkan did something very standard. And again, I don't want people to get outraged about this, which is why I'm mentioning it. She issued what's called an administrative stay for 1 week while the motion to stay pending appeal is briefed. And that means for this week, Trump can kind of say whatever he wants and not violate the gag order in DC. Not the same as the gag order in New York State, mind you, but the gag order in DC. All right. And so he's immediately, by the way, started attacking Jack Smith's team again, which he isn't allowed to do under the gag order because there's an administrative stay. The administrative stay is very, very, very basic. All right. It literally just says we're pressing pause on this order until the briefing is done. And I would expect that by like a week from today or early next week, that gag order is going to be back in place. But again, this is an effort at caution by this judge to not appear biased against this defendant who is very high profile, so that we don't end up in a situation where there is an argument to be made after conviction that the judge was biased all along. All right. So let's sit still on this and not kind of get upset about the fact that there's an administrative stay. Plus, he's going to say what he's going to say, as I already said. All right, let's talk about North Carolina for a minute, because this is kind of like a big deal. So late last week, the North Carolina GOP in the state legislature announced their redistricting maps. And those redistricting maps, I mean, I don't know how to put this in a way that isn't, I don't know. It's going to sound outrageous, but it's not. These maps are beyond the pale. Okay. What they have essentially done is so severely gerrymandered North Carolina that the GOP may pick up 4 seats. Okay. And so there are 3 people currently in office who are Democrats, who have now been redistricted into districts that are so heavily GOP that it will basically be impossible for them to win. They are Representatives Jackson, Nickel, and Manning, all blue elected representatives from the state of North Carolina. Additionally, they've done something that is in direct violation of the Supreme Court's recent case in Alabama. They have drawn 2 of the predominantly black districts in North Carolina down into 1, which means that there are now 2 black candidates who are currently in office, and they will be running against each other if this new district is redistricted. This is really, really, really bad. All right. So in essence, and I got to remind everybody, the Alabama Supreme Court case, which has now been up to the Supreme Court twice, was about the fact that Alabama redistricted itself so that it only had 1 majority black district. This is a very similar situation where North Carolina, the GOP is attempting to redistrict North Carolina to eliminate 1 of 2 black districts, predominantly black districts. And again, I'm going to point out, this is not lawful. We can expect that Mark Elias is going to file a lawsuit as soon as this passes, which is expected to be sometime this week. And unfortunately, because of the state of the law in North Carolina, the North Carolina governor can't veto this. So it is exactly what it looks like. It is very much an attempt to gerrymander North Carolina in such a way that the GOP can keep the House. Now, I got to mention that even in the worst case scenario, because I don't think this map is going to stick. I got to tell you, I think it's really going to fall very rapidly in a federal court challenge. But even in the event that it did, I got to remind everybody that New York has now redistricted in such a way that they are likely to pick up several Democratic seats. And that is not, it's not like unlawful the way that they did it. It's actually based on the fact that they had problems in their districting previously. So we may be in a situation where this is all going to balance out, even in the worst case scenario. But I have to tell you that I think that the likelihood of at least some big chunk of this North Carolina gerrymandering effort falls to a federal court challenge is extremely high. So again, we've got a lot of work to be done here in the federal courts about this. You know, Mark Elias, ACLU, I'm sure on it. Mark Elias signaled yesterday, by the way, that he was expecting to file another court case this week. That usually means that, you know, if we've got breaking news about gerrymandering, that's what's coming. So we'll see what happens with it. But again, people have got to really look at this very, very closely. And, you know, this is yet again a reason why I got to remind all of you, get involved where you live. Know what's happening in your state elections. Do not neglect state and local elections this year or next, because that's how this stuff happens. It doesn't happen because of a federal election. It happens because of who gets elected to the state legislatures. All right. So you've got to be as on top of what's happening state and local in terms of your own canvassing, text banking, phone banking, candidate work, you know, all the canvassing that happens in this community. You all are so on top of it. The postcards you write, right? You've got to really make very, very clear here that you're doing this, you know, at the state and local level as well as at the federal. All right. SAG-AFTRA is returning. Oh, before we get to SAG-AFTRA, let's talk about the Colorado case. As you all know, there are two cases currently challenging whether or not Trump can appear on a state ballot on the basis of the 14th Amendment provision that prohibits someone who's engaged in insurrection or sedition from appearing on the ballot for an election. The Colorado case is going forward. Trump filed a bunch of motions in relation to it, and all of those motions so far have been dismissed. They've been denied, rather. Somebody asked a question this morning about the write-in possibility, though. And so one of the things that's been discussed quite a bit, actually, is whether or not if Trump is removed from the ballot in Colorado or Minnesota or anywhere else, his base will write his name in. And there's been some gaming of this already. There's been actually like a fair amount of like polling and discussion of the likelihood of a certain percentage of his base writing in his name. So I am not worried about this, by the way. Like, I know some of you are kind of like, they're just going to write in his name. What's the point? So what the stats that I have seen are that the expectation is that about 30% of the people currently in the Trump camp would write in his name in the event that he is not on the ballot. And, you know, I have to remind everybody that in order to write in somebody's name, if you're not voting electronically, there's a process in many states that you have to go through in order to add somebody's name to your ballot. It's not simple everywhere. All right. That doesn't mean you can't do it. Voting rights should be protected. Please don't misread me. But I'm just like telling everybody that if you're writing somebody's name on a ballot and it's not the one that's already on there and you're running it through the dot reader machine, there may be extra steps that you have to take to do that. And that complexity could prevent some people from writing in another candidate, Trump or anybody else. All right. But if it's 30% of his base, and the current estimates are, you know, again, I got to remind you guys, watch the polling because it's very heavily skewed right now toward Republicans. If the assumption is that 20% of the nation is far into the Trump cult and 30% of that 20% writes in his name, that's like a tiny fraction. Don't make me do the math. My kids are learning fractions right now in 5th grade. That's a tiny fraction of the actual electorate. And reminder, it would only be in these given states. All right. So again, I got to be really clear here. You know, I have very mixed feelings about this 14th Amendment effort. I have mixed feelings about it because I think it is, in some sense, a gimme to the GOP that the Democrats are trying to keep Trump from being elected. They're trying to keep his name off the ballot, and they're the ones who are engaging in voter suppression, and it can be used to jack up the base. All right. And at the same time, in the event that he is removed from a ballot in one or more states, I'm actually not really worried about, you know, the issue of him being a write-in candidate. I don't think there's a serious danger of him being elected by being written in. And, you know, that is what it is, right? And he's going to complain that it's rigged no matter what. We don't need to give him more bait, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm kind of concerned about it. But we're going to have to see how it plays out. And again, Minnesota, Colorado are the two places where these cases are currently pending. Colorado is ahead of Minnesota, so we can expect a ruling out of Colorado. It would arguably be persuasive, not controlling authority over any other state. Another state could decide differently, in which case we end up at the Supreme Court. All right, so there's like all sorts of developments that have to come to pass before we even get to a place where we're going to know if he's off the ballot in Colorado or Minnesota or anywhere. All right. Okay. SAG-AFTRA is going back to the table. I hope everybody's paying very close attention still to kind of like hot labor fall, which emerged from hot labor summer. There's still a lot going on there. Again, I got to remind you all, please support your local unions. Please support union members where you live, don't cross a picket line. I know that the SAG-AFTRA strike is a much bigger deal in Southern California and New York than it probably is anywhere else. Don't be surprised if there's no new like entertainment for you in the next 6 months. Okay. And also I got to remind you that this is a really emblematic strike vis-a-vis enormously wealthy people and corporations and what's fundamentally a union with tens of thousands of members who are not name recognizable people, right? Like the people I know who have been on this picket line the most are like random voiceover actors. They're not random because they're my friends. I love you. I know you watch, but they're people who are voiceover actors who are making money off commercials and cartoons, right? There are people who are like extras in films who can't even make enough money right now to pay their rent. All right. So it's a really, really important strike. And I want everyone to be really mindful when you're seeing people unionizing, to support them, to make your voice heard on this. That, by the way, includes like your local Starbucks. If people are trying to unionize there, do your part to support unionized labor, because unionized labor is what gets us better working conditions for everyone. All right. Okay. Couple of things I just want to talk about here in the context of how we get news. So AOC, I mentioned this on the question feed over on Patreon this morning, but I want people to kind of, it does affect Georgia. Thanks for mentioning that, by the way. Like Georgia does have the third largest industry. So many shows are shot in Atlanta. It's like amazing, and films. But I want to mention something about how people are getting news, because AOC did a broadcast last night on Instagram about what's happening in Israel and the Gaza Strip. And she made a point, everybody should go watch it, because she was calling for a ceasefire and her points were so valid and it was so well thought through on every side. And a lot of it was about maintaining your humanity through all of this, which you all know I have said over and over and over again since the Hamas attacks, right? We have to not lose our humanity in terms of how we evaluate this. I have to also, this is one of the things that I want to push back on here. All right. So there's a comment here on the broadcast today. Gen Zs are powerful pissed at Biden for his allegiance with Israel. They're all over social media spewing they're all the same. This is terrifying me. Okay. It's not all of Gen Z. And again, this is why I wanted to raise this today in the context of TikTok. All right. There are some influencers on TikTok with big followings who are saying things like this. Okay. And then there are people like David Hogg. Okay. Or people like Santiago Meyer, or people like Victor Shi. All right. David Hogg spent the weekend campaigning for the first likely to win transgender candidate for state office in Alabama. All right. He was door knocking with dozens of people. Okay. Victor Shi, who is like an incredible voice right now for Gen Z, has a podcast with Jill Wine-Banks that talks about how cross-generational organizing is where it's at. Everyone who is following Victor Shi is in for Biden. All right. Santiago Meyer's organization, Voters for Tomorrow, which is organizing on college campuses all around the country, okay, has an incredible base. We're talking like hundreds of thousands of like Gen Z voters right now who are all in for Biden. And again, I got to make this really clear. If you are getting your news from TikTok, and AOC said the same thing last night, like I'm not bringing anything new to the party here, all right? You got to back check what you're being told. All right. Because there are a lot of people, for instance, on TikTok right now who are amplifying this idea that somehow Greg Abbott threw out 2.5 million ballots that would have gotten Beto elected. That's false. Okay. That's not real information. It's not accurate. And it's been disproven over and over and over again. But if the only thing that you're watching right now is TikTok news, you're not getting accurate information. All right. And I also have to point out one other thing here. Some of these influencers on TikTok who are saying this kind of stuff are people who are like lifestyle influencers. All right. That doesn't mean their audience isn't big, but I have really big questions about how many of these folks are actually going to be able to influence people who are planning to vote in the first place. All right. And the real question for me is not about like, are we all going to get all up in our fight or flight response about this, but what's the work that we're going to do in coalition to make sure that that impact isn't what these people are saying it's going to be. All right. And again, I got to remind you all, like we're 13 months out from the election. A lot can happen between now and then. And even if you disagree with what Biden has done in relation to Israel, I frankly am one of those people who doesn't think he's gone far enough, even though I think he's done a lot of really good things. I will tell, and I mean that in terms of Palestine. What I mean is that we need more pressure for a ceasefire. And that's what AOC was talking about last night. Again, please go watch it. But I really, really, really want people to understand something, okay? Just because somebody on TikTok says it doesn't make it so. All right. Just because there are people on TikTok who follow someone on TikTok who's saying it doesn't mean that the election is in jeopardy. All right. A handful of people, even dozens of people, even 1,000 people on a TikTok saying that they're not going to vote for Joe Biden doesn't throw an election. All right. And, so people got to get really, really real about this, because the reality is that it's going to take all of us working together in coalition to make sure the outcome is what we want. All right. And there's not going to be any other Democratic candidate other than Joe Biden. The question that everybody's really got to face down right now is whether you want Trump in office for a second term or another equally or worse fascist person, or whether or not you want actually democracy to survive. And you all know Olivia Giuliana, another great example, Jen Bloom. Thank you. Yes, Olivia Giuliana is a queer activist from Texas who went after Matt Gaetz, has created an incredible following, now is somebody who people listen to, Gen Z really listens to. And again, it's really critical that people kind of understand how this is going to play out. All right. We all have an enormous amount of work to do. Nobody's going to be able to sit back and take it easy heading into 2024. And one of the things that we've got to be doing is working in coalition. So if you're seeing stuff that scares you, the thing that I would encourage you to do, because this is what I always say, is make sure that you get involved in getting out the vote. And if that means, hitting up Voters for Tomorrow on their webpage, making a donation to them, sending an email saying, how do I get involved? Volunteering to canvass with Leaders We Deserve, which is David Hogg's organization. You can all do this, right? And, again, I have to say that those of you who've been here for a long time know that I was extremely critical of Biden's response to the far-right rising fascist movement 18 months ago, back into 2021. I really felt like Biden wasn't doing enough. But I will tell you something, because this is my philosophy, and those of you who are new here probably need to hear it. The deal is this. You elect the best candidate that is available to you that aligns the most with what you believe is possible, okay? And then you push that candidate in the direction that you want them to go. You don't not vote, right? You don't not vote. And, the thing you do is you vote for the best option that's available to you at the time, and then you push. Many of you know, I wrote an open letter to Joe Biden back in the summer of 2022 about the fact that I didn't think he was doing enough. I know for a fact that letter was sent to 19 different congresspeople's offices and ended up inside the White House. All right. So I'm just going to tell you right now that Biden has got to be reelected. There's not going to be any other option. And even if you disagree with some of his policy choices, your obligation as a participant in democracy is to work to push him in the direction that you want. All right. Your option is not to not vote for him, because that, by the way, is the end of America. It's the end of American democracy. It's really that simple. And, you don't like what Netanyahu is doing? Let me just tell you what it's going to look like here if Trump is reelected or another far-right fascist gets in power, in terms of immigrants who are seeking asylum inside the United States, in terms of trans kids, in terms of the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, come on. So, this is the other thing that I just want to remind everybody of. First of all, influencers may not be influencing that many people. Okay. So depending on who they are. Second thing to remember here is that the work is still to be done, and we have to do it. And we've got 13 months to get it done. All right. But the last point that I want to make here is that there's no other option. And, if you're somebody who's willing to throw away the entire nation because you don't think Biden's gone far enough in terms of liberating Palestine and providing humanitarian aid, by the way, I agree with that. I'm going to tell you that your obligation is still to vote for Joe Biden, because your obligation will be to push him, and to continue pushing him now, by the way, in the direction that you want him to go. The pressure is working, okay? It's not like he's not responding to the pressure that's happening inside the United States out of concern of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's working, and they're working diplomatically behind the scenes. So people got to get really clear on this. And also, big reminder here, okay? Division is what allows fascism to flourish. All right. We've got to be all in on this together. Again, this is one of the things that's so important about what AOC said last night, and everything that I've been saying here for the last 2 weeks, among what many other people have been saying out on the interwebs. We have to be able to hold room for the fact that Hamas is a terrorist organization, and that denying food, water, gasoline, electricity to 2.2 million people in a strip of land the size of Las Vegas, and bombing them more times in 6 days than we bombed Afghanistan in a year, is a war crime. Okay, what Hamas has done in terms of taking hostages is a war crime. And what Israel has done in response to Gaza is a war crime. Both things are true at once. All right. And we've really got to be in a place where, we understand that our advocacy and our willingness to maintain our humanity and our willingness to push our elected officials in the right direction is what makes democracy great. Okay. There is no option. There is no option to not vote in 2024. And our work, whatever generation we are in, is to make sure that we get out as many voters as possible. Because if we turn out the vote, we win. It's really that simple. That's the case for Democrats. It's always been the case for Democrats. And this is why you've got to get involved. All right. Final question for today. And let me just reiterate this because I want to make sure it doesn't get lost in the discussion. Okay. Do not get your news from TikTok. Do not get your news from TikTok. If you see something on TikTok and you have a debate about whether or not it's true, or you see something on TikTok and it sounds like it's true, please make sure that you go back check that like 3 different ways from a legitimate news source. All right. Really important in this day and age. Because by the way, there was breaking news this morning, in case you missed it, that was reported on Reuters and the AP and elsewhere, that this whole thing about bedbugs during Fashion Week in Paris was a Russian psyop designed to deny France, who has been like an ally for Ukraine, money that they needed from tourism to make it look like France is dirty, to make it look like people shouldn't travel to France. That whole thing has now been disclosed to be an entire amplified disinformation campaign by the Russians. Okay. All of this is happening in real time. Okay. Really, really, really key to understand that you cannot get your news from social media right now. And you can always bring it here and ask me if you're a member on the Patreon feed, and I will clarify it for you on the air. But I'm really concerned right now about how many questions have appeared on the question feed, even over there, that are not legit and where people are clearly getting news from TikTok and they're not back checking it. So important. So important. All right. Final question for today was about how do we define libertarian? And how do we define far-right libertarian? Because there's a candidate running for office in Venezuela right now who is a far-right libertarian. So I'm going to make this really, really easy on people. A far-right libertarian is Elon Musk, okay? It's somebody who believes that you should be able to do whatever you want, that there should be no government regulation whatsoever, and that fundamentally that means that you should be able to own as many guns as you want, that, other people's rights don't matter, that big government is the problem, and that, really you want anarchy and chaos. That's what a far-right libertarian is, all right? It's Elon Musk. That's who he is, all right? So if anybody has any debates about this, that's your prime example. I'm also just going to point out that we've seen a lot of far-right libertarians, coming to the fore inside the United States in recent years. You should know that libertarians at the moment are very, very aligned with fascist movements, all right? And it's undeniable. That's actually like a totally undeniable fact. Libertarians are aligned with organizations like the Oath Keepers. All right. And there's really there should be no doubt. There used to be this time where like libertarians were kind of perceived to be like, oh, we just want to be able to do what we want to do, which also meant that, like, for instance, they were very pro-gay rights. Not the case anymore. So that's the deal. Yeah. Rand Paul's another great example. He's like a far-right libertarian. Okay. Dude votes down everything related to civil rights, funding of Ukraine. He's tied up nominations. I don't know. I don't want to go off on this too much, but that's really what you need to know. All right. Okay. So that's it. That's it for today. This was another long broadcast. If you haven't yet liked this, please like it. I'm going to remind everybody that if you have questions, you can always venture over and become a paid subscriber on Patreon for as little as $2 a month. They go all the way up to $100 a month with lots and lots of perks. And you can ask a question 2 hours before every single broadcast. All right. You can also get in on Progressive Coffee Hour, and you can get our back catalog, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of broadcasts now, back from before we were out here public on YouTube, and even all the way back to when we were live on Facebook 5 days a week. I want to remind everybody that your subscriptions are what allow us to do this work. There's an enormous amount of effort, not just by me, but also by my team, that goes into researching and preparing for every one of these broadcasts, and also making sure that we're up to speed and we're accurate and that we correct things in the rare instance that we've made a mistake. And so your dollars really count here. They are what allow us to do this work day in and day out, and sometimes multiple times a day. All right. I am going to catch all of you live here tomorrow at regular time. And again, if there's any breaking news, you can expect me to do a breaking news broadcast. But I'm going to tell you that it looks like today's going to be a little bit slower. And those of you who have been here for a long time always know that on days where it feels like the news is running a little slow, it's a good day to take a break. So please take care of yourselves. Please engage in self-care. Take a nap if you need it. Don't look at social media for the day. Don't watch the news. Be rest assured you're going to get a push notification on your phone if anything big breaks. And I really, really want people to be very aware of the fact that we are in an incredibly high stress breaking news cycle pretty much all the time right now. And we will be until next November. So you owe it to yourself to be able to keep going, to manage your nervous system, to rest when rest is available to you, so that we can all get all the way through to next November in good shape and we can win. All right. I will catch you all here tomorrow at the absolute latest. I'll see you online for the rest of the day. Many of you know that Threads is where I am kind of like posting right now on the regular. So if you don't have a Threads account, you can follow me over there. It's the same handle, EC McLaughlin, everywhere. And I'll catch you all tomorrow. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. I will see you then. All right. Bye.